What if I told you that while Manchester and Leeds became giants of the Industrial Revolution, York, one of England's greatest cities, fell asleep? At the dawn of the 1800s, York stood as the 16th largest city in the nation. By 1900, it had tumbled to 41st place. This is the story of a medieval city that refused to change, then woke up just in time, only to discover that the future belonged to chocolate and steam. The ancient capital in decline. York had been powerful for 2,000 years. Romans built it. Vikings ruled from it. Medieval kings held parliament within its walls. But by 1800, the glory days were fading fast. The city was stuck in time. Only freemen could practice most trades. Want to work in York? You needed to be the child of a freeman, serve an apprenticeship to one, or pay £25 to the corporation. That's roughly £5,000 in today's money. The medieval guild system was strangling the economy. Fewer than 17,000 people lived inside the ancient walls. It was a city of shopkeepers and innkeepers, chemists and domestic servants. 3 glassworks employed a few dozen workers. That was York's industrial might. Meanwhile, just 40 miles away, Leeds was exploding with textile mills and iron foundries. The railway king's rise. Then came a draper's apprentice named George Hudson. In 1830, Hudson inherited £30,000. That's about £4 million today. He invested everything in the North Midland Railway. The gamble made him rich. By the 1840s, Hudson controlled 1/3 of Britain's railway network. They called him the Railway King. He became Lord Mayor of York 3 times. He built a railway station in the city that would connect it to the world. Hudson promised York would become the railway capital of the North. The first trains arrived, the tracks multiplied. York began to wake from its medieval slumber. Hudson built mansions, threw lavish parties, paid shareholders massive dividends. Everything he touched turned to gold, or so it seemed. The fall, February 15th, 1849. A Midland Railway meeting. Shareholders started asking questions. Where was all this money coming from? 5 days later, at the York, Newcastle and Berwick Railway meeting, 2 shareholders named Horatio Love and Robert Prance revealed something devastating. Hudson had been selling shares to his own companies at wildly inflated prices. The beneficiary? George Hudson himself. The empire collapsed in weeks. April. The Prance report demanded Hudson repay £30,000. He resigned from the Eastern Counties Railway. May 7th. Parliament launched a bribery investigation. May 17th. Another resignation to avoid being sacked. Evidence that he'd used company money to build a private railway station at his estate. By autumn, the Railway King owed £750,000. That's roughly £100 million in today's money. He sold everything. Paid back $200,000 just to avoid court. The rest he never repaid. Hudson fled to France. He'd die there in 1871, broken, forgotten. But he'd already changed York forever. The railways stayed. And they would transform everything. The Iron Revolution. By 1839, a small repair shop opened on Queen Street. Just a shed, really. 10 years later, it was repairing locomotive engines worth £15,000 annually. That's over £2 million today. The work expanded relentlessly. Engines, carriages, the entire infrastructure of the railway age. By the latter half of the century, York was deep in the industrial age, not through textiles or coal, but through the roar of steam and iron. The railway works consumed the north of the city. Thousands of men poured through the gates each morning. The sound of hammering metal echoed across the medieval walls. York was finally catching up. But the cost was brutal. The slums of Wormgate. The population exploded. In 1800, 17,000. By 1900, 54,000 inside the city boundaries, 83,000 if you counted the suburbs. They had nowhere to go but into slums. The Hungate and Walgate districts became notorious. Narrow streets, overcrowded courts, tiny, badly built houses crammed with families. Clean water was scarce. Multiple families shared a single outdoor toilet. A York medical officer of health report in 1914 described Walgate as having no amenities, an area where the police would only enter in groups of twos and threes. The district was characterized as indecent, immoral, crime-ridden. One observer described the conditions as the roughest place in York. The Water Lanes area, nearby, was where the scum of the country came to sleep with no discrimination of the sexes. Following the arrival of post-famine Irish immigrants in the 1850s, conditions worsened. Deteriorating housing stock, overcrowding, disease spreading through airless courts. This was the human cost of York's delayed entry into the industrial age. The chocolate revolution. But York had a secret weapon: Quakers. In 1862, a man named Henry Isaac Rowntree bought a struggling cocoa and chocolate business from the Tuke family for £30. Henry was a Quaker, teetotal. He saw chocolate as more than a product. It was a social mission. Chocolate drinks could replace alcohol for the working man, a wholesome alternative to the gin that was destroying families. In 1864, Henry moved the factory from Coppergate to Tanner's Moat. 5 years later, his brother Joseph joined him. Together they would build an empire. 1881. The breakthrough. With help from a French confectioner, Rowntree's began manufacturing pastilles. Previously, these had to be imported from France. Now York was making them. Joseph realized something. People wanted purer products. He spent years developing Rowntree's Elect Cocoa. Launched in 1887, marketed as more than a drink, a food, it became wildly popular. By July 1990, demand had exploded. Rowntree's purchased a 24-acre site off Haxby Road for a modern cocoa works. The factory would eventually produce Kit Kat, Smarties, Aero, Quality Street. Meanwhile, another chocolate dynasty was rising. Joseph Terry had established his confectionery business in 1838. Terry's would eventually create the Chocolate Orange and All Gold, two Quaker chocolate empires, side by side, transforming York's economy. This is why York smells like chocolate today. The banking boom. While chocolate and railways drove York forward, another quieter revolution was happening: finance. Banks began multiplying across the city. The City and County Bank, the York Union Bank, the Yorkshire District Bank, each one pulling money from across the north into York's counting houses. 1824. The Yorkshire Fire and Life Insurance Office opened. 10 years later, the York and North of England Insurance Company followed. York was becoming a financial centre for the region, even as it lost its manufacturing supremacy. The city still held markets. Wool sold from Pishon Green, an expanded cattle market outside Walgate Bar from 1827. Fish in St. Samson's Square. Parliament Street opened in 1836, filled with stallholders selling everything. It remained at heart a market town, just one with railways, chocolate factories, and insurance companies. The price of progress. But for every success story, there was suffering. The railway workers labored 12-hour shifts in deafening workshops. The chocolate factories, though run by benevolent Quakers who would later build model villages for workers, still demanded long hours for low wages in the 1800s. The slum dwellers of Hungate and Walgate lived in conditions that shocked investigators. York grew more slowly than Bradford, Halifax, and Huddersfield. While those cities roared into the industrial age with textiles and coal, York stumbled forward with its freeman restrictions and medieval mindset. Only railways and chocolate saved it from complete irrelevance. At the beginning of the century, York ranked 16th among English cities. By the end, 41st. It was a fall from grace, even as the population tripled. The legacy, York's strange 19th century, created the city we know today. Because it industrialized late and partially, the medieval walls survived. The Minster remained the centerpiece. The narrow streets weren't demolished for factories. The charm persisted. The chocolate industry gave York a global reputation. Rowntrees and Terrys became household names across the British Empire and beyond. The railway works made York an essential node in Britain's transport network. The banks and insurance companies kept white-collar money flowing through the economy. This is why York feels different from Manchester or Birmingham. It never fully surrendered to the Industrial Revolution. It negotiated. It delayed. It compromised. And somehow it survived. The slums of Walmgate are gone now. The railway works closed in the 20th century. But walk through York today and you can still smell chocolate in the air. You can still see Victorian railway arches. You can still trace the outline of what happened when a medieval city woke up, looked around at the industrial age, and decided to join on its own terms. George Hudson, the railway king who fell from grace, made it possible. The Rowntree and Terry families made it sweet, and the workers who crowded into slums and factories made it real. York didn't conquer the 1800s. It survived them.